Hey everyone, and welcome to the React Native Show podcast that we record from React Conf 2024, Henderson, Nevada, near Las Vegas. We are co-hosting this conference, Callstack and Meta, this year, and we want to take you behind the scenes of this wonderful place and wonderful conference. I'm here at React Conf 2024 with Andrew Clark. Hello, hi.
Hi,
how are you? So Andrew was a part of the keynote. The keynote had 7 speakers.
Yeah.
And the keynote was basically going over the, let's say, landscape of the whole React 19 things, right? Yeah. So what were your parts that you discussed during the keynote?
My sections where I talked about a new feature in React 19 called React Actions. And then I also went over, it was kind of a more crowd-pleasing but less important announcement about how we are making ref a prop and getting rid of the need to use forward ref, which seemed to be an applause line.
Yeah, that got a lot of attention. So let's start there. So we're assuming you already watched the keynote, and if you haven't, just pause this and go back and watch the keynote. I'm going to start with refs. So you said that the architectural decisions to make refs not be a usual prop was because of the class components. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I would say I also said it's like kind of boring and unimportant because you don't really need to know these reasons, but I find it somewhat interesting just as a historical thing.
Yeah.
If you imagine there's a time before function components, right? Mm-hmm. I think the function components were introduced in 2015 or something like that. So there was a 2 or 3 year period where the only way to write components in React were class components. Mm-hmm. And when you pass a ref to a class component, so refs normally you would pass them to a DOM element, like a div or a form or a button or something. But if you pass a ref to a class component, it attaches to that ref. And the value of the ref is an instance. And so because it used to be that all components basically were valid targets for a ref, there wasn't this concept of passing it through. There wasn't I accept a ref as a prop and pass it to an inner thing. Mm-hmm. It's if I pass a ref to something, I want the ref to attach to that.
Yeah.
And so in the implementation, it was such that the way it was implemented was in the JSX runtime, we would pluck the ref off of the props object and store it separately. Mm-hmm. And then once we added function components, it just kind of inherited that old implementation detail, so that the ref wasn't on the props object. So that's the overly complicated reason for why that happened.
Because I have a follow-up to this, and is it a breaking change?
Technically, yeah. And that's why we didn't immediately do this. A few years ago when hooks came out and people were complaining about this problem. That's why we had forward ref, is to avoid a breaking change. But technically, you can have a component that, it changes the type of the props object, right?
So if I use React 19 right now, mm-hmm. Let me think about the question.
Yeah,
I want to get it right. So if I use the React 19 right now, can I still use class components?
Yes. So the behavior with class components has not changed. I didn't really make that go into that much detail in the conference, but if you pass a ref to a class component, it'll be the same thing. It'll attach to the class, and it won't show up in props.
Okay, you've heard it here first. React Native Show podcast. Andrew Clark admits that this is only a functional component change, not the class component change. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's talk about actions. Yeah. So I remember that in React 18 we already had access to actions. And those were called server actions back then, as I remember. So what's the difference? What's the evolution?
Yeah, it's a little confusing. I think the branding the messaging could have been a little bit different. But server actions is really just actions, but where you define it on the server. So I tried to convey this in the keynote, but actions as a concept has nothing to do on its own with the server. It just so happens that you can pass a server function to an action, and then when you do that, you call it a server action. Okay. But actions in general, the overall pattern encompasses all actions regardless of where you define them. The thing that's interesting about server actions is they do have some additional nice properties related to progressive enhancement. So, for example, if you pass a server function to an action, React your app will be interactive even without any hydration, because we have this neat trick where we can serialize an HTTP endpoint into the HTML form, so that if you click it, even without any hydration, it can trigger a full page navigation. So that's the cool thing that is neat about server actions that regular like client actions don't have. But other than that, they're essentially the same thing, other than where you define them.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you the last question about the Keynote. Is compiler compatible with React 18 as well, or is it only compatible with React 19?
So we're not recommending it for things before React 19. I'm adding a caveat because I do know during testing, because we've been testing this since before React 19, obviously. And theoretically, like there's a runtime that the compiler compiles to that it depends on, that only exists in React 19. But in previous versions, theoretically, what you could do is like polyfill this runtime, or have it. I think there is like a flag with the compiler that will output to a different runtime, not the one that's built into 19. So there's no technical reason really the compiler couldn't work, but the current version of the compiler and its feature set is not limited to what exists now. The plan is to keep adding additional features.
Oh yeah.
So I think official support is going to start at 19, and then eventually there's going to be new features that depend on new runtimes that like might only exist in 19.2 or whatever. So to be honest, I don't know exactly how that story is going to work out. Like, will we version the compiler and React together in the same on the same schedule? I'm not really sure, but I think that's safe to assume that if you want to use the compiler, you should upgrade to 19. And also, we're saying if you're already on 18, I don't think it's that hard to upgrade to 19. There are a few breaking changes, but it's not going to be. We don't expect it to be that big of an upgrade.
We are on the second day, and in the keynote on today's morning, Kadi from Expo, she said that the React Conf app that we all use here is built with Expo, and it was optimized with compiler. And I actually went to GitHub and checked that she does use the runtime for compiler there.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what version of React that app is on, but probably not 19.
She might have been using the experimental channel, because we've had it in it enabled in the experimental channel for a while. Or she might have been doing this thing I said, because some of the people who got early access were using this polyfill strategy. I just don't think that, I'm not sure we're really going to recommend that for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, like I said, there's no like real technical reason why it's impossible. The runtime is actually pretty simple. The use memo cache runtime that you might have seen in the examples, it's not a very complicated runtime. It's just we don't want to endorse this like going forward as a strategy of polyfilling that runtime, because we might add things in the future that can't be polyfilled, right? That depend on an actual React input runtime.
Last question, first comment from me, and question to you. So comment from me is that I came here for the first time ever for React Conf.
Yeah.
What amazes me here is that people are so nice. This community is so great to be around. So many great people from the community that we look up to, that are just mingling between us common people. And I really loved how during the keynote, you are from Vercel, and you mentioned that Remix does a really, really good job, and that we all enhance this ecosystem. So this is what I like about this conference. What was your best memory? What is your comment to the conference here?
Well, I mean, a few people mentioned that Remix thing to me. Like, it wasn't, I didn't even think twice about it, to be honest, when I was making the slides. And part of it is just, and I've known Ryan and Michael since like the very beginnings of when I was working on React. Like, I think I met them in 2015, 16, something like that. So it's not really, like, I've watched their work on React Router and on Remix, and I work on Next, but I'm a Remix fan. Like, you can go look at my previous tweets, like from even before I joined Vercel, and I think Remix is great. We have some technical differences of opinion sometimes, but nothing but respect for what they've built. And I think it is fair to say, like I said in the keynote, that they were ahead of the curve in terms of really embracing form actions as an API to really latch onto and to base these patterns on. And they really fit to, I'm not sure if remixing never existed, we would probably have a feature like actions, but I don't know if we necessarily would have had the thought to layer it with the form API the way they did. So, full credit to them for really leading the charge there. And I think it's obviously there's some competition going on in terms of like Next versus Remix, but the pie is so big that and this is the thing that I've always liked about open source is like, it's not zero sum. So, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but like there's so many different use cases out there. There's so many different people building things that the weird paradox of open source is that sometimes collaborating with your competitors just makes the whole thing bigger. It makes everyone benefit. And that won't always be the case, but I think Actions is an example where like Remix and Next and everyone else are going to benefit, and we should embrace it when that comes up.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah. It's good to meet you. Yeah.
I'm here with Mofei. Hey, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very, very good. I'm really excited to be here. We are on the second day. We are almost wrapping up the conference. So right before we talk right now, you had your talk about React Compiler, and you also was a part of the keynote where you were speaking about React Compiler yesterday. So I want to talk about React Compiler with you.
Yeah, I want to.
Let's assume that everyone already watched the keynote and watched your talk. So I have a few questions there. You said that React Compiler compatibility will start from React 19. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, we really want folks to migrate to React 19 because we think that if your code base is in a good condition and follows the rules of React, you should also be able to easily adopt React Compiler. With that being said, it's not a strict prerequisite. We do have an additional polyfill that we've published. It's called React Compiler Runtime, and you can use that polyfill if you're on React 18.
And I think that was used in the React Conf app, where Kari said that it is already using React Compiler, and it is used in React Native. So I'm glad about that because I'm primarily a React Native developer. So I'm really thankful. What is your opinion? What is your thinking around having worked on this for so many years and being able to announce that it is ready to be used right now?
Yeah, it's really exciting. I joined the project a bit later than Joe or Satya. I think Joe's been working on React Compiler for at least 3 years now, but we've all been so excited and seeing all of the community feedback, seeing kind of online discussion about various trade-offs that we've been considering, even seeing folks' interactions with the docs and the working group. Yeah, we're so excited.
Yeah, we are excited as well. We've been waiting for this. So, question about the behavior of React Compiler. Right now in standard React, we have all of those playgrounds and all of those rules that basically allow us to conceptualize how the UI will behave to the change of state. So let's say I change the state and I expect my whole page to revalidate, to re-render. With React Compiler, some of that is getting done behind the curtain. Some of that is being optimized for us. So my question there is, when we move from that easy to understand deterministic flow to that behind the scene, how does that play with understanding of how React works?
Let's see. Understanding of how React works. I think it's actually more powerful because I think React Compiler and just having a stricter programming model actually lets you think about your app in a more structured way, which generally leads to writing more maintainable, more readable code as well. We've also found that kind of this difference in behavior where parts of your app stop getting rendered as much, it's not a problem if you're following rules of React. And even if you're breaking some, as long, for the most part, the compiler can detect and just work around it.
Can I opt out on certain files from using compilers altogether?
That's right. And yeah, please read our docs. We have a really great guide on ways to kind of selectively enable on certain directories or even certain file names and opt out on either a file name or kind of component basis.
Yeah, I know from your talk that if compiler detects that rules of React are not followed, then the component will be opt out automatically almost.
That's right.
To your second talk, we talked about the Keynote and the compiler in general. To your second talk, when you live on stage re-implemented in 20 minutes or so the like 2 core functionalities of compiler, and you left like, let's say 8 not implemented. My question from presenter point of view, how do you prepare for that live demo?
Oh yeah, it took so much work. I think my teammates all laughed and I was like, I'm going to write React compiler in 20 minutes. And there's a lot of additional logic, even in that short demo, just in kind of understanding the program. Because if you have an if branch, the way we have to represent this in the instruction level as well. And for other things like kind of generating the memo blocks and making sure that that's an optimized output. So if you look at our README, if anyone's interested in this stuff, you can read our README in the React GitHub repo, and it describes some of these architectural decisions. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of communicate our intuition in building the compiler and kind of walk folks through how we think about a program and how a compiler might.
If I have my old code base and I put a lot of use callbacks and all of use memos and memos all of the place there, how should I prepare that old code base to be used with compiler?
You should just be able to enable the compiler on it as is. So the compiler will kind of remove the use callback calls, and for use memos, it will inline the body of the use memo call directly into the function.
Okay.
Before optimizing. So this way you don't have to change your entire code base to depend on this experimental compiler release, but you can still get the benefits by trying it out, testing, and if it works, maybe you can do something more with it.
Okay, awesome. Last question, and it was actually asked already at the Q&A later yesterday. What's the future for the compiler? How do you see the functionality growing?
Yeah, I think Joe gave a really great answer in the Q&A yesterday. Honestly, I'd recommend you to probably watch that. I fully agree that I think the compiler is just the first step. It gives us a really good foundation and understanding really every piece of React code that you write, and yeah, further optimizations or even a deeper understanding of the code fueling IDEs and future changes in the runtime, I think are entirely possible.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm here with Kent, who was speaking today. We are at React Conf 2024 in Henderson, Nevada. Kent, first question for you. How many faces of yours were on the keynote?
I never counted, but I saw people sharing online. So they had this slide that was like, thank you community. And Ricky put it together and had used my face to line everything up and then swapped out all the images. And I guess the slide that ended up there was an unfinished version of that slide. So I was on there, I think like 7 or 8 times, I guess. But in my talk, I showed that slide again, and it was the finished version. So I had everybody else's faces on there.
Awesome. Such a nice thing of you to do. And also during your talk, you mentioned a lot of other speakers as well. I think, I guess you were editing your slides previous nights.
Yeah. I was editing my slides like 10 seconds before going up to add that community slide. So yeah,
awesome.
I do that sometimes.
So assuming that everyone already watched your talk because the talk is available.
Go watch it. Yeah, then.
Can you explain, like I'm a 6 years old, because I'm not a web developer by trade. I do React Native most of the time and React Native for TV at that. So when I saw you re-implementing framework, building it from scratch, what's the key takeaways for a 6-year-old like me to take from your talk?
Yeah, well, my talk was pretty advanced, so it required a lot of prior understanding of how React works and everything. But I would say the simplest thing for maybe a 6-year-old who's been a little bit introduced to the idea of data is when we're typically making our React applications, we've got our components and we've got our data, we put them together and that creates the UI.
Yeah.
And what React Server components allow us to do is to move that over to the server, but then also compose in the interactive bits, the client components, and vice versa. So mix and match the things that are going to be static from the server or the things that will be dynamic from the UI in the browser. And that's what makes server components so special. And that's the sort of thing that I haven't seen anywhere else. That's a real innovation in React.
And you can do that not on the whole page, but very individually, very detailed placement all over the application.
Yeah, and the benefits of that approach are numerous, or they're not numerous. I can name a couple of specific use cases, but the impact is enormous.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the benefits, how about the cognitive overload that you have to know to understand your talk, to use React Server components, as opposed to like static site generation or even server-side rendering, which are familiar concepts and are probably the best choice for everyone that wants to start their like Hello project anyway.
Yeah. So when I teach React, I've got my Epic React series of workshops, and I always start with like, here, we're going to make a DOM node in JavaScript, and now we're going to make that with React DOM, and now we're going, so we iterate, and it wouldn't, eventually I get to, here, let's build a React Server component framework so we understand that, and that's like the last thing that I teach. And so at any point in there, you can be like, I know enough to build what I need to build, and so I'm going to just go build it that way. So I wouldn't say that every application needs server components. That said, it is recommended that you use a framework with React so that you get all of these optimizations. Yeah. So if you're going to build a hello world thing, then yeah, fine, you can do it all in the browser. But if you want a real application that has what our users are expecting of us from a performance perspective and just a usability perspective, then you're going to want to have these things, and a framework is going to give that to you in an optimized package.
Okay. Last question about the conference, about the React Conf 2024. From all of the talks that we've seen so far, which learnings would you recommend everyone to go back and see in which talk?
Yeah, that is so, I mentioned several of them in my talk. If I had to choose just one, then I like conference talks to be inspirational, that like inspire me enough to say, oh, okay, I'm going to spend a little time thinking about this. Or maybe,
so Dan Abramov.
So Dan's talk was awesome, but right after his was Evan Bacon's talk. And everybody here is talking about that talk. And what made it so special was, okay, so we talk about React Server components, it's confusing, it makes sense, whatever. But like, let me show you what I can do now that we've gotten server components. Yeah. And it just was a really cool, practical, like, oh, like I wasn't sure server components was the right direction, but now that's really interesting. And maybe I'll invest more time learning about it.
Also, it was really, really nice how we put it in a way to understand the use case, to understand that you don't have to use it, but if you have this specific use case, it's such a powerful tool to have server-driven UI.
Yes, yeah, precisely. So, and server-driven UI isn't an invention of Evan. It's something that Netflix has been doing and things, but what is really special about what Evan did was show us that server-driven UI is something that React Server components enables in a way that's simple for us now. Like, it's very complicated without server components. So, yeah, I appreciated that talk a lot for that reason.
Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you. I'm here with Josh from Vercel. Hi. You had two amazing talks today. You've been a part of the keynote, and also you had your own talk about what was the talk about?
It was about the new features that we're adding to React 19 to allow you to better coordinate all kinds of HTML I always feel weird kind of saying that because it seems like that's such an obvious thing for React to be able to do. But I mean, things that are non-visual, like style sheets, scripts, and document metadata, things that kind of have to go at a very specific place in a document, but maybe there's a component that doesn't like live at the very top of your application that should be rendering that information. And that's a composition challenge in React 18 today, and all prior versions of React. And React 19 has some new capabilities to make that less difficult.
So let's assume that everyone already watched the talk. The stream was available online, and probably by the time we upload this, there is a recording already on YouTube.
Yep.
So I have two very specific questions for you. So one is, it seems like with the introduction of streaming, with the introduction of React Server components, those kind of problems that you try to resolve were not there before. So you have to resolve something that was not a problem before React Server components, right?
I mean, I guess you could think of it that way, but the thing I would characterize it as is, before streaming, you had to wait the entire time for a render to finish, right? So let's say that takes, this much time, whatever this means, it doesn't really matter. And now with streaming, you could start seeing user interfaces, whatever, be it interactivity from part of your application way sooner. So you could consider that a benefit, right? But, that does introduce an incompatibility with certain sort of techniques that were, used to be used to make, composable document metadata and script loading and whatnot. And so we just need to look for other pragmatic ways to still support that without losing the benefits we have here. Now, if you just always waited until the entire render was finished, you would continue to use kind of the old techniques and they would still work. But we want you to be able to have both.
Yeah. Okay. The second very specific question is that you said in your talk that there is a trade-off in what you do, in what you introduced on the stage, that there is a trade-off between compatibility and reliability. I think I'm not sure if that's the correct way of phrasing this, but the question is, the part with reliability, can this break?
It's not that React will break, so no. What I mean is that, sort of different tools deal in HTML differently. And browsers have forever been incredibly tolerant of just the weirdest stuff. You can throw very strange HTML documents at a browser and it'll try to make sense of them.
Yeah, you can just throw a text file with just a string in it.
Exactly, and that works, right? So browsers have this perspective that we're going to always try to show something useful. And, so if you're imprecise with the kind of HTML you produce, you can still get pretty far. And other tools like things that just do string processing on an HTML document, maybe they only look in the sort of the head tag string contents to see if some value is there, right? They're not rendering the page in the DOM. They're not running client-side JavaScript. They're just doing some basic analysis on this HTML document. They might look to the spec, the HTML spec, and say, well, all my link tags or all my, sort of metadata tags are supposed to be in this head, so that's where I'm going to look. So if you need your React rendered application to be usable by a tool like that, then you need to be able to produce a document where those tags are where that tool expects them to be. So the reliability isn't about, and I think a character isn't not reliability, it was spec compatibility. And browser pragmatism. And the idea is that, we try to be spec compliant, but at the end of the day, if we had to make it so that every document metadata item always appeared at the head, we lose our, sort of ability to do streaming. Who does that really serve, right? And browsers are already very tolerant of kind of late arriving HTML, and we embrace that. But you still have a way to produce documents where you can ensure that, this metadata is, wherever it needs to be. If you're trying to produce a document for Open Graph image parsing, I think was my example in the talk. There's ways to produce a document with React application that sort of ensures those things are going to be where they are. I didn't say it, but another aspect is that, you could also just ensure that you're rendering that kind of information not inside a suspense boundary. And then React will always produce a document that has that metadata in the head.
You just have to wait for it longer, okay, for the whole document. Last question, and it's not specific to your talk, but general into whole React ecosystem, web ecosystem where we are today. What would be your advice to people that are just learning React, and they watched React 2024 conference, and no one explains what React is, how it differs from HTML, CSS. We jump straight into, look at these new hooks that we have, look at this complicated manipulation of head tags that we have, and, server components, React compiler, all of that. So what's the practical advice for someone that just is going into the space for the first time and tries to wrap their head around it?
I think that I'd just say, these talks are an opportunity to share, new developments, and you're not supposed to necessarily perfectly understand them, depending on your sort of experience level and whatnot. They might be interesting, and they might spur you to go look into, sort of this feature capability today, or maybe in a month, or maybe in a year. And so if you're just starting out, there's a ton of resources to sort of get started with React. The React.dev website has, great kind of sort of thinking in React type documents that aren't just like APIs, but like how do you sort of conceptualize what React actually is. And of course, you start there, right? You don't have to feel like you're missing out if you sort of don't get sort of the topics that are being discussed in the talk. And after you spend some time with it, go back and watch these. I'm sure that they'll be on YouTube or some platform in a little while. They'll sort of, the content sort of memorialized. You'll be able to kind of like re-engage with it, and then sort of with your newly acquired skill set from whatever study or practice you did, you sort of be able to appreciate it differently.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm here with Evan Bacon, a superstar talker from yesterday on React Conf 2024. Evan was speaking about bringing React server components to Expo and to universal apps in general.
Right. Yeah. So we have an early prototype of Expo Router using universal server components and bringing server-driven UI to all platforms.
Yeah.
So pretty exciting. So
it is pretty exciting. Everyone is buzzing around about your talk here. I asked several speakers which talk was their favorite one, and everyone says it was yours. So congrats, man. Awesome job. Assuming that everyone already saw it, can you walk us through behind the scenes of actually building this, or the actual implementation details from Expo perspective of infrastructures that enables this, but also from perspective of developer that uses that infrastructure?
Concisely, the infrastructure, like ultimately the server-driven UI that is universal is the goal of Expo Router. So originally when we built Expo Web, like when I built Expo Web maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, as far as it could really go was a single page application, because that's what native apps were doing. And you don't really want to fork on things like the fundamental rendering patterns and data fetching and the flow of data throughout the app. So what we needed to do was rethink the entire native strategy such that you could do all the same complex architecture things on native to share them with web. Because that means you need server-side rendering, static site generation, and data fetching, file-based routing. So Expo Router, the goal there was to add all these features to native so that we could universally share that code between native and web. And now with things like RSC acting essentially as our version of HTML, we're able to do things like pre-compute the RSC the same way that you might pre-compute HTML for your website, and then have the same data loading strategies, the same like async components. And so ultimately this is kind of like the final vision of Expo Router is what we saw yesterday. And
so that's the infrastructure side. That's something that you've been thinking about for the past probably 3 years, of universally sharing the core elements of Expo to be able to enable this.
Right. So like the first version Expo Router was file-based routing on native. The second version had some, like node runtime because it had the server abilities. The third version introduced API routes in the server platform for web. And then this next version, which, depending on like how many major changes we need to make on the way there, this will be the one that adds proper server-side rendering to all platforms and SSG to all platforms, API routes to all platforms, data fetching to all platforms. Like you get it basically nails all of the final pieces of architecture required to really write the critical parts once and share them everywhere, because it's like, it's pretty fun and nice to, change the style of an app once for iOS and once for web and once for Android. But you don't really want to be like solving errors and like network waterfalls once or like multiple times. Like those are the parts, like server rendering is the part that you want to write once and run everywhere. So I think a lot of the fundamental tricky parts between web and native, specifically on mobile devices, will be solved with this Expo Router.
Also, something that we already discussed yesterday, right after your talk, is the piece where we have API routes in the I think it was the SDK 50 that you introduced this back in January, and that now you build on top of that to enable server components, right? So that API route server, I guess, recognizes what platform are you connecting from and what happens then?
Yeah, so our current API route structure is very similar to what web-only frameworks do, which is a platform-agnostic, version-agnostic endpoint. With server actions, that gives us a nice abstraction because we are generating the endpoint behind the scenes to inject information about being platform-specific and version-specific. So we have this like kind of magic bundler layer, which is creating the ability to lock what is returned from an endpoint to a specific version of a native client. Yeah. Because if you have a map view in one version of your app and you don't have it in the next one, then you don't want to be hitting endpoints that are unversioned and returning things which have different expectations. This isn't a problem on the web because the web, the native runtime is always backwards compatible, theoretically. And so you can make things that are unversioned. So if we want a universal system that works with custom runtimes, we need to account for the versioning in the platform side of the endpoints as well.
So like the matrix of complexity grows because we have different platforms and also different native clients that maybe have different native possibilities to hook in from server components.
Right, exactly.
So that was the infrastructure layer. Can you please say a few words about what your developer experience was like building the demo app, building all of that crazy shit that we saw yesterday on the stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at some point, when I was working on the talk, I was like, we need a prototype, which is really interesting. When React Native came out, one thing that was awesome about it was that it was used inside of the Facebook app for Marketplace. Yeah. And 10 years ago, everyone wanted to be like the Facebook app. And so I thought it would be really sweet if we had an app that was something that everyone wanted to build, and everyone, like, they would see it and they would just be inspired to like want to go out and build something like it. You don't get that if it's just, boxes on the screen, which is what my original prototype was. It was just like various boxes and it said like how it was rendered on it. And it's like, that's
not sexy.
It's a bit of a bummer. We pulled in some like AI and some streaming, and you could like generate and then pull back some content, looked at like the ChatGPT app, the Gemini app, and then thought like, how could we make this as good as possible? Because ultimately it's not about AI, but about the fact that we can represent abstract native code as a string and then render that in different places. So even though we don't set out to make the best possible like AI app, this tooling enables you to do that. And so like now imagine if you want to make the best possible food app or the best possible banking app, like having the ability to render in different locations is the primitive that enables that. We don't have to like go out of our way to build templates or anything for every type of app.
Yeah. Because you mentioned that in your talk as well, that server-driven UI is not a new concept. This has been with us since probably all of the like UI use cases from way back. But what people tend to do is they tend to like just send a JSON that represents the screen, and that map over this JSON and pick and match JSON entries with components that you already have in your app, and then just rebuild that UI. What server components are enabling us to do is to have very similar concept, but be generalized to not only the components that you already have in your app, but primitives as well from React Native.
Yeah. So the first version of the prototype, like after I had gotten the streaming server actions working and a few other features, then I was like, okay, I think I could build like this AI type chat application that's server rendering in components. That only took me like 4 hours to make. It was like mind blown just how quickly I could move through it. And then I, progressively just kept working on adding in new features. And it was so easy to add the parts of an app that are traditionally very difficult to add, like authentication or interacting with data, like working with secrets. Like you just put your secrets right there in the code and it gets split into the server. That I was able to spend the rest of the time just focused on like the styling and the animations and like making sure it feels like a native app, right? Because traditionally it's like, okay, we can come back to those later. They're the easy part. We need to focus on like making sure that the authentication works right and you spend the majority of your time there. With this, like I had like a Tesla widget in there because I had like rented a Tesla for a weekend and I just wanted to like add something where I could ask the Tesla and it came back. I just go to the Tesla website, grab the code, like the fetch block in there for the web, drop it into my React Native app, and it works verbatim, right? Like it's using environment variables. We support that. It expects to run in a node runtime. So unlike fetch requests inside of React Native, which have like small quirks, you could just move that into a server action. And now you're calling it like a server action, which has a little bit less like complexity requirement. And then you're running a fetch request in Node, which has a much more standardized set of WinterCG primitives. So you just have a lot more options, and you're able to move so fast. Like it was a lot of magical moments. Like I remember when I first used React Native, it was so magical coming from like an iOS Objective-C background. Like if you wanted to set up a list, you would have to like do UI table view delegate and code over here and over there. It was so magical to use like flat list and be like, you can just render a list with an array and a function. This is like the most magic I've felt since then, where it's like I can just like fetch data and render it, stream it down. I don't have to like worry about where the server goes, how I deal with secrets, if the requests are fast. Because here, these aren't just like normal server-driven UI, like these are optimized React server component requests. They're streaming in. Like you said, people use JSON. This is like new line delimited JSON. So content is being streamed and represented as it's coming in. So you're getting like really fast, super optimized requests. And then it's also all optimized to run in like edge runtimes. So you can deploy it to things like Cloudflare and then get like instant access. So yeah, it's pretty sweet. It really just takes the modern state of native and moves it right up next to the modern state of web development, which is the best that you can get.
It definitely feels like it. And with other announcements from React Native and from Expo, it feels like server components are one piece of this whole puzzle, but the other piece is that we finally get the confirmation from React Native team that you should be using framework, and Expo is the framework of choice right now. And
it is a framework. There'll be more in the future. So it really feels like we are able to use new architecture now. The past 2 years of building up all these like new things in React finally paid off with React 19 and with React Native new architecture being able to use all of that. So we are again in the same space, if you say. When React Native first came out, there was not a lot of people doing declarative UI. Now everyone does declarative UI on native. And now you look at React Native objectively and you say like, okay, I've got this JavaScript running over here on the client and I have my native views over here. It's like, why do I need this extra layer? And like you were saying, all the pieces like finally come together where you see, okay, this JavaScript layer is super valuable because half of a server-driven UI implementation is the ability to bind props to some sort of like JSON artifact and then very quickly and efficiently bind them to native views. So React Native does half of that, and it's shipped throughout the world at the largest possible scales. And then we're able to take that JS part and then just move it to the server. So we already have like that. If you just imagine there's JS running on device, now you just take that engine and move it to the server. So we're like halfway there. All the pieces really come together and everything makes a lot more sense when it's holistic like this. So I think it's, really, really clean.
Awesome. Evan, thank you so much for that thorough explanation of all of this. And I guess we will see you on React Universe Conf in Wrocław in September.
Yeah, I'm going to see you guys there.
Thank you. That's it for my React Conf 2024 behind the scenes. Let me know how you enjoyed the interviews, and I hope to see you all at React Universe Conf this September. As always, we're meeting in Wrocław, and you can buy tickets at reactuniverseconf.com. See you there.